Hey, what's going on, everybody? Sean from PlanningFire.com here, back with another part in our Millionaire Next Door series. Here we're going to go ahead and cover part 5. This is my 5th reading session of The Millionaire Next Door. We're going to cover the chapters, the key concepts, and anything that I found interesting. Stick around. So the first section is titled Affirmative Action for Women. Direct quote from the book. This is what he named the chapter. Just a heads up, these statistics are quite old, being from 1996. However, I'm sure the concepts still apply. I know this is a hot button issue for a lot of people, which is why I'm sticking just to the facts the author presented. Basically, women in 1996 were 46% of the American workforce. Of those, only 20% of the people making over $100,000 a year. So for every 4 males making over $100,000, there was 1 woman back in 1996. What's really interesting is the growth of women in the graduate sector of jobs in the high-income producing job market. In 1970, only 6% of medical graduates were women. However, in 1995, over 45% were women. That's a dramatic increase, especially for a 20-year block of time. Now, the earnings were shocking. Basically, compared to their male counterparts, again, in 1996, a female physician earned 52% as much as 57% as much as a male dentist, 55% as much as a male podiatrist, and 57% as much as a male lawyer. There's any number of circumstances that could have led to that, but these numbers were really interesting to see that these top income producing jobs, they were only making about half of what their male counterparts were. What's interesting is that women own 1/3 of the small businesses in the Americas. You would think, being half of the workforce, they would own half of the businesses. It's actually a little less than that. And of those businesses, 2/3 of those make less than $50,000 a year. This is interesting, but it's also common. They talk about a little later in the book that businesses are more often than not going to fail and not be profitable. So this number is very representative of that percentage as well. Women are more likely to leave the workforce than men. That could be due to pregnancy, it could be due to taking time off, perhaps doing a career change. And 80% of wealthy households interviewed have the wife stay at home, which is an interesting, though not surprising statistic considering the time period. Women born in that era were told about a career. This is something that the author calls out specifically. Basically, it's the, hey, don't worry about it, go and marry a nice man concept. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be anywhere near as true nowadays. However, when this was written, it's important to make a note of. Next, we get onto the section of the weak and the strong. There were a lot of case studies here. This is one of those areas that I find very difficult to read, though, because it's going to be very common. Basically, you're going to have person A and person B. One of them is going to be strong in this area, one of them is going to be weak. They tend to be siblings, so as far as actual case studies are concerned, they're interesting, but they're not really all that interesting for me to recap. So if you want to read more, check out the book, but otherwise, the first one is between Anne and Beth. They're sisters. Anne receives minimal assistance from the parents because she has her own job. Beth, however, receives excessive assistance. Her husband works for the family, and the attitude towards money doesn't foster independence. Parents are worried what might happen if, say, they close up shop and now the husband no longer has a business, or what if they pass away? He also tends to be an underperforming person, so they're really worried about one daughter and not the other. Now, this case study was a lot more interesting to me. You have Sarah and Alice. Both of them are, once again, sisters, very similar backgrounds. However, Sarah is an executive. She's strong-willed and often fought with her father about women in the workforce. He had a very old school mentality where women should be stay-at-home moms and housekeepers and never leave. However, she fought back tooth and nail, and those arguments actually made her father withhold support. This gave her this drive to prove him wrong and to succeed. Her sister, on the other hand, was more than willing to take this assistance. She became very dependent on her father's income. She wasn't able to support herself, so continued to receive gifts from her parents. However, once the father passed, Alice went to Sarah to receive the same level of dependency. It's almost a double negative. Basically, you're not receiving assistance from your parents, which is making you become independent. But then, because you have independence, once your parents passed away, now your sister needs someone to rely on again. So now you're paying for that, basically because you were so strong-willed. Is it right? Absolutely not, but it's an interesting case study nonetheless. And the last key points that I found here were that male adult children are 2 times more likely to live at home than females. Basically, more male adults are living with their parents once they're out of college or out of high school. Unemployment in early adulthood is directly correlated to unemployment later on in life. It's not really surprising when you think about it. A lot of times people who are going to be unemployed for long periods of time either don't have very marketable skills, don't know how to sell themselves, or perhaps it just happens to be a bad series of events that have caused them to be in this position. But if you maintain that level of skill set, or perhaps you don't do anything to make sure it doesn't happen again in the future, it is called out that that is a direct correlate. So once again, just to touch on the acronyms, UAWs, under accumulators of wealth. PAWs are prodigious accumulators of wealth. I'm going to keep calling them yaws and paws, a lot easier to say, but yaws tend to brag about income and wealth. This ties directly back to the fact that they aren't great at savings. They put too much value and too much emphasis on the things they own and the money they get as opposed to actually building wealth or building success. Paws, on the other hand, brag about achievements because they are proud of success and they're proud of measuring success. Yaws associate happiness with wealth. Again, that ties directly into the fact that they pride themselves on their things and their status. Paws, on the other hand, associate happiness with success. The drive, the motivation, the outcomes. Also, a key element that they discuss in this chapter is estate planning. And they say when making an estate plan, it's very helpful to have a third party involved. Basically, estate tax law, estate distribution can get complicated very quickly, and it's much better to have a third party who's not tied into the estate making the clear, level-headed decisions. Also, it can really help save the family because people aren't going to be fighting internally. They'll use that energy and channel it externally towards the third party. Is it good for the third party? No, but they're normally well compensated in the form of a percentage of the overall estate. So they have some reason to make sure it's staying whole, but they're much more likely to make sound decisions than someone who isn't as equipped to make those difficult decisions. Now, when I was reading this section, I thought this would have been an excellent place to end the book. Basically, it's how do you take your wealth and pass it down to your children? We spent the entire book talking about ways to build wealth. What a better way to pass off that information in a summary format than right here. It's not the end of the book, but it's still very interesting rules. So this chapter was titled Rules for Affluent Parents and Productive Children. And they had 10 simple steps to making sure you're producing productive children. Basically, never tell children that you're wealthy. If your kids don't know you're rich and they don't feel rich, they'll never be raised to think they're rich, and it'll be much more conducive for them to learn the value of a dollar. No matter how wealthy you are, teach your children discipline and frugality. Those are two key concepts to building wealth. You need to be disciplined not to spend it when you don't need to be, and you need to be making sure you're making frugal choices to realize as little of your income as possible. Assure that your children won't realize that you're affluent until after they've established a mature, disciplined, and adult lifestyle and profession. Basically, once that's already been hammered home, once your children are providing and they're self-independent, if they learn that you're wealthy at that point, it's very unlikely that it's going to change their attitude. It's already been built in. They already have a career. That's just the icing on the cake for them, knowing that you're happy, they're happy, and perhaps their lifestyles won't change. Minimize discussion of the items each child and grandchild will inherit, and they make it a point to call out, especially during parties, well, perhaps there may be a drink or two involved. It's very difficult for you to remember what you may have promised away, but it's very easy for the individual components to remember that, especially if you end up promising away the same thing to different people. That's how those arguments can absolutely break out. That's why it's always important to have a nice will and trust set up so you know firmly what exactly it is that you're trying to do, who's going to get what, and the decision's already made. Or you can rely on a third-party estate planner for that. Next, they talk about never give cash gifts or other significant gifts to your adult children as a negotiation strategy. Give only because of love and kindness. And this really is a healthy way for you to make sure that you're demonstrating love and kindness and not creating a competitive environment. Make sure you're only giving gifts for the right reasons. An example of the wrong thing to do here would be, if you go to college, I'll give you $100,000 when you graduate. It's not a great way to build that self-reliance. Stay out of adult children's family matters. Let them run their own lives. This again is fostering that common thread of independence. Make sure you're raising your kids to be self-independent. That way, you're not constantly having to be there to provide for them. That will give them this ability to provide for themselves and for their families. Don't compete with your children in matters of success. Basically, you have age on your side. So it's saying don't end up competing with your kids over success. Congratulate them, support them, and make sure you're fostering a caring environment for them when they do succeed. But the last thing you need is to be comparing yourself to your child when they're just starting their career. That may defeat some self-confidence and is not conducive to developing wealth or building success. From an early age, it's important to emphasize your children's achievements, no matter how small the achievement may be, and not their symbols of success. So, for example, if your child goes and gets a great job out of school, you want to congratulate them for that drive. You don't want to congratulate them for the beautiful vehicle that they were able to buy because of it. It sends the wrong message. I want you to know that I'm proud of you because of the actual achievement, not necessarily proud of you because of the dollar value. And lastly, and probably the most important thing, tell and teach your kids that there are more valuable things than money. For example, the only thing not buy is more time. So make sure they know that money is not the only thing that's important. Love, family, time, all of these other things are much more important and are not something you can make more or less of. So to summarize, part 5, this was a decent reading session. I really like these rules for affluent parents and productive children. We've kind of gotten to the point now that a lot of the points he's been trying to make have already been made. However, the statistics are still sound. Some of those things are very interesting. And also, it was an easy enough read. I will say this section definitely had some areas where the date that the book was written is really starting to show its age. I'd be very curious to reread the affirmative action sections with much more up-to-date data. It would be much more interesting from a 2018 perspective than a 1996 perspective. Do I still recommend reading the book? Absolutely. If you like this video, please hit that like button or subscribe. Always happy to see the subscribers. Otherwise, until next time, have a good week.